All right. Yes, as we mentioned, one, thank you for a wonderful introduction. I super appreciate it. And as my extremely long title states, that I am the Principal Marketing Manager of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Community Programming at HubSpot. That super long title just says that we are going to be talking all things diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm going to be using the DEI&B acronym many times throughout this conversation. And so that's what it stands for. This last year and some change has been the year to discuss DEI&B. And it's pretty shitty that it has to come at the hands of violence and social media pulling to light systems that have oppressed the global majority for too long. And I'm going to use the phrase global majority a lot instead of underrepresented or marginalized. So I fully give you permission to like sneak over to another tab, Google what people of the global majority is, and then come back. But that's another talk for another day. I just want to make sure that you know that definition. Today is the day that community needs to put DEI&B at the forefront of everything that you are doing. I also want to pre-recognize, and please don't get this confused with apologize, because that's not what I'm doing. For some of the stuff I might say, I was a little reckless when I was writing my notes, and I decided to go for it like Beyoncé did with the Lemonade album. And as always, I came here to slay. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll change to our first slide. If you're currently sitting in your seat looking like SpongeBob or have looked like SpongeBob in the last year, that means that you have either felt that, one, your community is too far along and you've missed too many opportunities to get started or implement DEI&B practices. You're in allyship freeze mode, which I like to call performative ally, one that says what they're doing but doesn't really put it into action and is afraid of being wrong. And the third descriptor that mentions the fact that you're just sitting here and there's a lot of explicatives floating around because of stress and things like that. But if you don't curse, just reinsert the SpongeBob GIF into that area. You're either overwhelmed from where you've begun, or you did a couple things, they didn't work out, they made things worse, brought more issues to your community, company, or yourself. I just want to reiterate, DEI&B work isn't always comfortable. It takes an emotional toll, and you are going to do things wrong. And the sooner that you own that, the quicker you're going to be able to bounce back and be able to make necessary changes for the better. Let's go ahead and get another slide change. In order to address all of these concerns, here are the topics we are going to cover: diverse communities, promoting equity, intentional inclusion, community belonging, having year-round momentum, and just, yeah, keeping it going. If you're excited about this, now that I've made some folks a little bit nervous probably, but overall, drop your favorite excited emoji in the chat and let's do this. I'm super pumped. I'm super pumped to talk to you all about each of these topics. And as you're dropping those emojis, let's go ahead and introduce the next slide. Before we deep dive into what a diverse community looks like, let's have a quick pulse check. And I love all of the emojis that are dropping in. We got fires, we got thumbs up, we got the party hat, we got hands clapping, lots of smiley faces. We'd love to see it. So as you're dropping those, I have another question to get the crowd going. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I promise I did not cheat before asking this question. I didn't look up anybody's companies who were going to be here. I just have a general question. So I'm going to have my answer on the next slide. But my question for you all is, does your company have a specific mission or business goal around DEI&B? Just drop a yes or a no, thumbs up or a thumbs down in the chat to my side. My next slide gives my guess. So I promise again, I did not cheat. Oh, we're seeing some yeses, some no's floating in. Allison, I appreciate the honesty of kind of. Andrea, informally, yes, I see it. Kate just said there's a hard X going. So it's like a 50-50 going. That's actually surprising in terms of what I thought it would be. Let's go to the next slide and see what my answer was. I said no. Yep, I absolutely said no. Most companies probably don't have it. And if they did create it, they probably created it in the last year. So we're just going to go with my answer was correct. But a major factor in this is that a lot of companies over the last year have just talked the talk and they didn't walk the walk. Just like you said, Andrea, most are really performative. Seeing as this headline, only $250 million out of $50 billion has come to fruition. And that's quite the gap, we must say. And this dollar amount is potentially what that gap looks like in terms of representation within our community. Go ahead and change to the next slide. When you are thinking about your community, you need to build out intentionality in your actions. Here, I keep it simple with this simple math equation by amplifying intersectionality, which are the relationships between social categories and the people and concepts that can fall into more than one category, and inclusion, which is providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. This creates an intentional community where you have different stories, backgrounds, parts of the world, ethnicities, and more in your community. Now, don't get me wrong, many communities will be exclusive to a particular background. For myself, I run a community for Black professionals. We only have Black professionals in the community, but I'm not going to remove any of their other intersectional identities from the work I'm doing or limit it to one Black professional's experience. I'm going to have LGBTQ plus people in there. I'm going to have international people. I'm going to have people from different socioeconomic backgrounds that I need to be sure to amplify so that my community still feels seen and not othered within their own community. Next slide, please. Now, if you're wondering where do you even begin, here's a list of questions that I like to ask either when I first assess a community or prepare to launch a community. Who are your top members? Who is in your research groups? What is your members' personal journey in the community when it comes to their identity? What does the language in your community look like? What does your mission statement say, and where is it located? And finally, how do your guidelines protect the community, and are your moderators being consistent about it? And if you want to see who's doing it right, here are a few communities that I enjoy and encourage you to check out their work. Let's go to the next slide and see who. While you may not be able to be directly a part of a specific community space, there are other ways to get involved and support. One major thing that sticks out for these communities is their tagline, especially Boston While Black and Techaria. You know who the space is for, what you're going to get out of it, and how you fit in. We love to see it. It leaves no room for mystery. We love to see all of this. All right, off to the next slide where we go to our next topic of promoting equity. And go ahead and change again. You need your community to be equitable. This means you need to recognize members' journeys and give them the tools to succeed. You might be thinking that this sounds like a lot of work, and visualizing that your work is about to become the lines drawn on the wall from either, if you think the L Word, where Alice has her chart, or if you think Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and he has this whole conspiracy wall. It doesn't need to be that complicated, even though you may do that a couple of times. When you implement these tactics of getting creative with avenues to share info, whether it's written in video format, events, podcasts, collaborating with members or future members, opportunities to amplify growth, whether you're creating a course, having them be a thought leader, writing content, working with them to see what you can deliver, bringing in people for networking or introductions within your company, other companies, or other members, and leaving space for feedback, whether it's in a one-on-one group, small convo, or making yourself accessible when needed. And I see that everybody's talking about the slide size. We're super sorry if you can't see as clearly. I'm trying to read off more than what we had here. We had some technical difficulties because virtual conferences. All right, so we're moving off to the next slide. Community members deserve to enter our space and breathe a whole body sigh of relief because they don't have to hide who they are or feel like they don't have a seat at the table or an invitation to the party in the first place. This is a short list of some action steps that can be implemented along with the ones we just reviewed. These different areas allow for community members to connect, build their skills, and show impact. Let's go on to the next slide. All right, intentional inclusion. I hope you guys are noticing this trend with intentionality. That's one thing I really want you all to be able to get out of this conversation. Next slide, please. The first step is to take an audit of your community and answer these questions. Who are your top leaders or contributors? What does gamification look like? Are these photos? Are there photos? Who's in them? Who writes your blogs? Who stars in your videos? Who are your featured members? Once you have these questions answered, you then want to check out the trends based on your responses. Next slide, please. If you notice that it is the same kind of people that are in these top spots or starring in your videos, whether that's by appearance, job and background, global location, or other factors that are similar, that's your clear understanding that you need to make a change. Where are the gaps in your community's journey? What are the personas missing? Do you need to reevaluate your personas? Because that does happen. People change, they evolve. You might have to change up your persona. What are the gaps that are already in your space, and how can you help to resolve this? We know that there are systems that are built against people of the global majority. How can your community overcome them? For myself, when working with the Black and inbound community, I'm working against wage gaps, funding gaps, microaggressions, racism, homophobia, sexism. Each of the actions I am implementing in the community are working to combat these isms, phobias, and systemic failures. And that seems like a lot, but if you're taking those first steps to get started, you're going to make an impact. Other opportunities that I have here are around bringing the voices in the room. Educational moments, not skipping steps. I'm going to repeat that again, not skipping steps. But the main one that I want to lean into is creating values with your community members. For Black and inbound, our values are representation matters, resources and collaboration, connecting diverse entrepreneurs, and celebrating and amplifying voices. We are creating an intentional space for each of these values. These values will drive all initiatives that support our community members. Representation, support, networking, and elevation will be key subcategories to these values. Then I broke these values down by audience or persona, however you title it, to see how each of these values fit for the different user journeys. Values are the bread and butter with some garlic salt on top because it's chef's kiss for your community. You can't do anything without them because you may stray away from your main focus. Next slide, please. And that's right, Andrea. Inclusivity can't be limited to skin color. That's just the easy way to get out. So next, you need to see what is already happening in the areas that you are working with, not just the obvious spaces. So say that you're working on a community for fans of the National Women's Soccer League, or NWSL for short. Yes, this is very geared towards my interests. I am not ashamed. Each of those fans are going to have different experiences based on location, interest, resources, culture, and more. Then you have to get into the nitty-gritty of each of those communities. What is the experience like for those adults? What is it like for a person of color, anyone who's LGBTQ plus or an international fan? And wait, we have to do this for all of the teams to see what that experience is like, because Orlando Pride fans are going to operate way different than Chicago Red Stars fans. And if you don't know, now you know, Portland Thorns fans are on a whole other level. So while you may not identify with each of these identities personally within your community, it's an opportunity for you to step outside of your box, ask permission for entrance. Don't just like put yourself in the space, ask permission, or take the time to go more one-on-one with the leaders of those groups, receive feedback without putting yourself directly in that space for safety and comfort reasons, or hire someone that is able to, because you know we love a diverse team. Next slide, please. And on to our final main topic, community belonging. Next slide. To refer back to our earlier checklist, pictures of diverse people are nice. So is an inclusive mission statement of values. And I don't mean to belittle what I said before. That was a starting point. But if you do all of that work and then don't provide opportunities for belonging, it will all seem a bit performative. There's that word again. You can deep dive into more of these from Charles Vogel's book, The Art of Community, The 7 Principles of Belonging, where I got this list. But I'll give you a high key summary here. So the 7 principles include boundaries, stories, initiation, symbols, rituals, the inner rings, and the temple. Or in other words, the way I like to break them down is within safety, consistency, familiarity, understanding, and opportunity. Doing these actions allows for community members to feel like they belong. I could be the CEO of the most badass tech company in the world, but if I walk into a room of only cisgender white men, my imposter syndrome is like, pew, 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 everywhere. I know that I'm not the only one to exist, so how come they aren't in the room? Even if every one of these men is super nice, no one is rude or says anything off the cuff, I don't see myself there. So how can you change that? And to get the title of the book again, it is The Art of Community, 7 Principles for Belonging. All right, next slide. As community leaders, I think that we have the best opportunity to learn about people on a therapist level. We are building spaces for people to be unapologetically themselves, meeting them where they are, growing trust and acceptance, allowing them to be seen. And then one day, that person has a breakthrough and they shine. This happens in therapy. This happens in community. Take a therapist mindset to community. And this is not to disregard the amazing work that therapists do, and please don't get as deeply involved as therapists do, but the framework is there. And I don't know if many of you knew, I was a music therapist before I worked in community, and that helped me leaps and bounds with what I needed to know. I was patient when people were frustrated. I could hear what they actually needed. We could work to a solution and then help with actionable steps moving forward. And like the wonderful Brene Brown says, that I feel wraps up all of this information around belonging. Belonging doesn't require us to change who we are, it requires us to be who we are. Next slide. All right, be that person to keep DEI&B work going in your community. Let's keep it going. Next slide, please. I'm sure most of you understand the beginnings of how you get involved with a community and how you talk to your community through research, feedback, talking to members. But now you get to take it a step further. Find other resources from different companies to tune into for information around world events. Be proactive. Don't wait until something major happens for you to act on it, i.e., this whole last year and some change with Black Lives Matter, just for an example. And never think that the work is done. Last summer, we had a huge spike in activism, but that spike looks a little more like this right now. It's kind of looking like this right now. And it's the same thing with your community. You can have that spike in interest and spike in showing up and showing out, but how are you going to maintain what's going on in your community? You can't just do one survey and say that you know what their needs are. You can't think that your community is just a monolith that's not going to like ring up and down and round and round and have stuff happening in their lives. Change up the questions on your surveys, ask more about their experience. I love the sense of belonging index questions to see how your community members really feel in your community. You are the person that is going to drive this forward. It won't always be easy, but it will always be worth it. Next slide. The one thing that I want to leave you with, besides obviously Beyoncé, because that's what we do, if you don't take anything else from this conversation that we had today, the one thing I want you to take is to take actions for your community to exist proudly. And like Queen Bee says, we're wrapping up the conversation. So any questions? I'm going to jump over to the Q&A tab to see what's happening. Oh, you're back. Welcome.
I'm back. Yes. Just basically, well, first of all, that was one amazing presentation, and thank you very much. And I apologize from all our viewers with regards to the size, and all the comments are taken on board. And also, I also had some suggestions about changing the the resolution and the screen size and everything. But I just didn't want to interrupt the flow of your presentation. It was so nice. As a consolation, I can say that this is being recorded, so you may be able to rewatch it on YouTube, and obviously re-listening, and maybe able to zoom in. And as I said in the beginning of the presentation, this was a temporary fix. It was either this or no presentation whatsoever. So most certainly, it's been one fantastic session so far. So let's jump into the questions very, very quickly, and thanks again. So Minerva Chu is asking, is there a resource that is the most up-to-date to learn the best terms to use?
Ooh, that's great. I wouldn't say that there's like a one-stop shop, but especially depending on which background that you're looking into, I would look at like nonprofit organizations like first. So say anytime I'm working on like LGBTQ plus identities, like I did when I worked at the Her app, I would always go to those nonprofit organizations first to see what resources and information that they pull out. Use those organizations all the time. I know that we have like only a short time to answer that, so I'm going to give that to say, look for nonprofits.
Fantastic. So there was one comment rather than a question, but I agree. You're amazing, Shana. So yeah, that's correct. So let's move on. Will this session be available for sharing? Please say yes. Yes, it will be available for to be rewatched on social media. So look out for a repeat. So I'll just skip over because we have limited time. So will this be talk version of will be available somewhere to share back with our teams and organizations? Yes. So that's answer sharing on social media. Right. David Spinks, His Highness, is asking, what is the balance of one person owning DEI versus making DEI a part of everyone's job?
ooh, that's fun, because that's literally what I do. I am the person that is owning the DEI strategy and items on our team. And then I'm working with all of our other team members on their strategies of how they can implement DEI into their work. And so it's a lot of opportunity for cross-functional collaboration. And I think that each team, especially now for community, needs to start having the role that I have. I know that I think I'm like one of, if any others, but I think I'm one. And all of my work is based on that cross-functional collaboration. And so making it a part of your job should be a natural thing upfront. Unfortunately, it's not. And that's where I'm working with other teams to like go back and look at their processes, how their language looks, what their guidelines look like, who are the people that they're working with, how do they feature it, and then also holding my team members accountable when they come and ask for, who are some speakers that I'm looking at and things like that, because they're like, oh, we just don't have like enough representation right now. Who do you suggest? And it's like, let's think about the fact that this should be like a part of your strategy, and how can we fix that moving forward, rather than being like, oops, we forgot to have somebody diverse that fits in this category here. Let's move from there. So I would say having both somebody that runs and owns it, but also a cross-collaborative effort to make sure that it's primary for your team.
Cool. So now let's try and get the most upvoted question from Jessica Falkenthal. So when you start working on a community that has a toxic culture, how do you help your community members evolve in their understanding of DEI&B and cultural competency as humans?
Jessica, this is near and dear to my heart, and it hurts a lot, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time and a lot of consistency. You have to find the top people that are in your community that are going to help make an impact, because if there's a toxic group, there's a toxic leader. We got to find out who that leader is and make sure that we either get them to switch sides or find somebody else who is going to work with you, and make sure that there is a ton of implementation of feedback from your community in the changes that you're making, so that whenever you do make a change, they're not just like freaking out like, oh my God, I hate change and I don't want whatever this is. You can say that like, we had this meeting with this group of people and this is what we discussed and here was the result. And the more that you continue to do that, the more that people are going to start getting used to the fact that you're making these new changes. And as new people come in, that is going to be the baseline of what they're used to. I had to do that with her, where we had a bunch of toxic people and people who ran their mouths and did that. I made them my allies. And sometimes that's emotionally draining and you're not going to want to be a part of it. But as much as you can, like, that's what you want to be able to do, is to like try and cross that bridge with them and then work your way back. Otherwise, you're going to start to find new leaders that can come in the space and are able to take that through too. And they're going to be great moving forward.
Fantastic. Maybe we can squeeze in just one question from Dara. What are your thoughts on organizations DIYing their DEI versus hiring professionals with DEI experience? I think it's a great question.
Oh, that's a great way to phrase that. Okay, Dara, I like it. So companies at this point need to figure out that DE&I is no longer a nice to have, but a must have. It's almost like similar to that same conversation that we have about community. It's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. And companies who are going to do this are going to invest. They need to invest in the people who are already doing it. There are so many consultants that you can just bring in, and groups and people. Like, you can't just sit and say like, there's a Black person on your team, they know about some DEI stuff, let's promote them and move them to knowing these features moving forward. There are strategies, there are plans, there are action steps, there are people who have this as a profession. Sometimes you do have to work to get that buy-in, but more companies are being external facing about what they're doing, and especially big companies like HubSpot's one of them. But even though Google has stumbled, but they're trying to make comebacks with accelerator programs that they're doing and other stuff that you can like tie to. But you have to also have like your team hold management accountable. And that doesn't always feel great, especially when you're like, I just want to be in my workplace doing my job and doing my things. You need to be able to have people like speak out and make sure that like your manager knows, their manager knows, and continue to pass that along. And so companies can no longer DIY their DEI. And that might be a future conversation that we title it. And I hope you let me cop that, because that was great.
I sincerely hope, you have my invitation. So David's here, so probably let's hear from him. So thank you very much. I have one very, very, very fine question. Maybe we can squeeze that in. Favorite Beyonce album, they're asking.
Oh, best question ever. My favorite Beyonce album is 4. That is her best album vocally and live performing, period. It is underrated. That was her album that she did right after she left her dad's management and all of this. That's a whole other conversation. But 4 is her best album.
Indeed. Shana, that was just fantastic. Some really good questions and some fantastic stuff from the audience as well. Let's go to the next session. That's going to start in the next minute or so. So everything's going to be recorded, so you're going to be able to see it again. Apologies again for the technical situation, but would love to see you in the next one. So Shana, thanks again, and hope to see you all in the next session in a minute.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.